Jason, welcome to Q.
Pleasure.
Nice to be back in Toronto.
It is nice to be back in Toronto. It's been a few years.
Is there something you do when you come back to Toronto? Like the first thing you go to a certain place, or?
Oh God, that's a great question. I feel like I'm most often here for a film festival, so the first thing I'm doing is like going to see a movie.
Right. But getting a double-double or anything like that is not part of the...
No, no. I wish I had some great answer to that question, but...
I wish I had a better question.
It's been a pleasure being here. It's always good to see you.
When the scandal broke, the Gary Hart scandal broke in '87, I was reading you were watching Arnold Schwarzenegger films like Predator and Commando. So the story obviously didn't grab your attention.
I don't know if it was specifically, literally at that second, or what's seen in Commando, but if I presume, it was the one in the Sherman Oaks Galleria where Arnold grabs this balloon and he like flies through the center of the atrium.
So what brought you here 30 years later?
When I heard the story, I couldn't quite believe that there was a moment in our history where the next potential president of the United States wound up in a dark alleyway with a few reporters.
Yeah.
That seemed unbelievable to me.
It was like a podcast, wasn't it? You heard it?
Yeah, I heard it on Radiolab, which is an exceptional podcast. And, you know, you listen to Radiolab and it's almost every one of those episodes could turn into a movie. They're just fascinating. But this is one that stayed with me. And when I went and bought Matt Bai's book, the further I dig, the more I found. And I thought, well, you know, it feels like there's a dozen different points of view on what happened here.
You get the feeling that this scandal is something that like paved the way for the way we see news media now, or the way we see politics now?
I'm not sure if it paved the way, but it certainly was a thread. There was a moment where things shifted. And they shifted in a lot of ways, I think. You know, there's a moment in which a wall went up between politicians and the press. And that's really unfortunate, because I think that it stopped kind of the easy conversation. It stopped the moments that happen after the workday when, you know, you're just drinking together or hanging out or on the plane or in the bus. And you develop a feel for who these politicians really are. It's kind of, you know, look, it's easy to forget in American politics that not so, you know, far away, there was a moment in which candidates were literally just picked in the smoky back rooms of conventions. And when that power was put into the hands of people and we started the primary system, we needed to figure out who the hell these candidates were.
Right.
And that fell on the shoulders of the journalists. And of course, once that power is put into the hands of the journalists, the question is, what do we want to know? And that's what the movie is asking. What do we want to know about these politicians? Who are they? And what flaws are we willing to put up with?
Because Gary Hart wasn't the first. I mean, you even acknowledge it in the film. You know, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson. These are people who were well known for having affairs, and the journalists knew that they were having an affair.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to certain journalists who said that when they narrow it down, they can only think of 3 presidents who did not have affairs. But
Nixon was. We're not going to get into it. Sure, I understand. I know.
Let's go one by one,
it's
shall
more
we? I want to get
William Howard Taft.
Let me pull out my Excel graph. But you know, this was the first time that political journalism and tabloid journalism really just kind of drove into the same lane. And it became this moment, and it all happened so quick, where a newspaper like the Washington Post is having this inside conversation. This is something that we show in the film of young reporters versus older reporters, veterans versus newcomers, men and women trying to decide, okay, what is relevant? What do we need to cover? And if everyone else is covering it and the public is demanding it, does that make it news? And I don't have the answer for that question, but it's something that I know it meant something then and it really means something now.
Oh, I want to get into the idea of questions versus answers in this film in just a second, but I also know that when watching this film, I noticed that you were careful not just to tell the story of Gary Hart, the senator who, you know, who could have been president, who had the affair, but you also told the story of how it impacted Donna Rice, the young woman from Florida who he had the affair with.
Well, I have a lot of empathy for Donna Rice. I mean, this is a young woman who was bright and aspired to a lot of things, and her life was stolen from her.
Right.
And this is a movie in general that is interested in the emotional burden that's put on women's shoulders. And it's just as interested in a young woman in the Hart campaign, a young woman at the Washington Post, you know, who are forced into the position of basically speaking for their entire gender. And in the Woman on the Hart teams specifically, was tasked with bringing Donna Rice home. And I was very curious about what that conversation would have been like.
Did you get to speak to Donna?
I did. I got to know Donna. She was the first person to watch the movie of the people that the film was based on.
She's a born-again Christian now, right?
I know she's very religious. I know exactly what's that.
Was she able to reflect? Was she able to tell you some of the stories from the time?
I don't want to speak for her too much, but it's funny. The first thing she said was, "God, these performances are great." I forget that. I expect to have this, deep emotional conversation about 1987, and the first reaction from anyone is always still, as like a film person, is like, "Oh, I like how you shot it, and those actors are great." But beyond that, I think she was moved by the empathy that the film had for her.
Well, the empathy is the main part, because I think when I was watching the film, I was analyzing, the role of the news media in this. Even speaking as someone who's in the media, and as someone who asks people questions about themselves, sometimes personal questions about themselves. What is the role of that? Why do we need to know these things? And Jason, I'll tell you, it's something I think about all the time. But I also thought about like just the various social forces that kind of led to Gary Hart, that it wasn't just necessarily the media, but it was also for the first time in society really looking at how women were treated in the political system.
Right.
For the first time ever, that they weren't these, props of politicians, that they weren't these people to be used by politicians, that their rights mattered too. And I thought it was interesting how you tackled that.
Thank you.
You were looking at what was the name of the film? The Candidate?
Yeah.
I had never seen The Candidate.
Oh, you should.
Yeah?
Oh, it's great.
What do you remember from, it was a Robert Redford film, 72?
Yeah, exactly.
What did you take from that specifically? Or what was it about The Candidate that lodged in your mind when you were making The Front Runner?
First time I sat down with Matt Bai and Jay Carson, my co-screenwriters, who, Matt Bai is a New York Times Magazine journalist. Jay Carson was the press secretary for Howard Dean, Hillary Clinton. Right. The three of us got together and we watched The Candidate. And what we collectively recognized was, this is a film that is always asking you what is important, both through visually and through audio. It's presenting you multiple characters, and most often an innocuous conversation is like about sandwiches is happening in the foreground, and an important conversation is happening in the background. So for a movie that is always asking what is relevant and what is important, it was exciting to me as a filmmaker to make a movie in which I'm going to show you many things happening at once all the time. The camera is going to be floating through these rooms, floating through these newspaper floors and through campaign offices and on buses and on planes, and you as an audience are trying to figure out, all right, what is the important information here? And the movie concludes on a shot in which two things are happening, and you're kind of really forced to make that decision.
You've mentioned in previous interviews that you found Gary Hart to be an enigma. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, here's a guy who, to this day, I think his family and his close friends, the people who worked on his campaign, admire him, but they don't have easy access in. I think that's what makes Hugh's performance so strong. Hugh has this enormous heart, and we see it in roles like Logan, Greatest Showman.
Yeah.
What's hard to play is a character that is a closed box that you're trying to find your way into. And it's hard to figure out Gary Hart. We want easy answers on things, but he's not an easy answer.
Tell me about meeting him. You met Gary Hart.
Yeah. I met, he lives in Colorado. He lives on the same ranch that he lived in the 80s when he ran for president.
The same one that's depicted in the film.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So did you fly? You flew out there?
Flew to Denver, drove out to see him.
How was that?
I mean, it's scary. I mean, this is the first movie I've made about a real person, and there's a tremendous responsibility that comes with portraying someone's life, particularly if it's going to be the worst week of their life.
Yeah, and someone who, in the film, you make no bones about it, doesn't like talking personally about himself, and now has to have a film about the personal side of his life.
Yeah. Though I knew, at least for myself, going in, that I didn't want to delve into anything that I felt like I shouldn't have access to.
But did you glean anything from meeting him even now, like all these years later, that made you go, yeah, he really is hard to understand, or he's, not to say hard to understand, but he is an enigma. There is something.
He is the person I presumed he would be. Vast intellect, deeply aware of everything that is happening to this moment, concerned about this country, wanting the best for it, and simultaneously very guarded. And I have to be honest, I didn't want to learn more in that meeting because I wanted to make a movie about characters who were trying to figure him out from the outside.
Right. It's almost if you learned too much about him, you'd almost have, you'd ruin the mystery of it.
I didn't want to, even if he had offered, hey, let me tell you what really happened, I don't think I wanted to know the answer to that question.
Really?
No. Look, is there a part of me that wants to know?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
In the same way that anytime someone goes, let me tell you a secret. Oh, yeah. Let me tell you something I've never told anyone else.
Yeah.
Of course you're going to want to hear the end of that
I usually
sentence.
walk out the door.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to hear it.
And the question I have is, what part of us wants to know that? And what part of us needs to know that? And then when it comes to politics, what part of us should know that?
Did you get any answers on that?
In making the film, I'd say this is the first film I've made in which I've gone in with questions, but I've come out the other side with more questions. And I work with really smart people. I surround myself with great filmmakers. And we talked every day about these things, whether it was with my fellow writers, the fellow people making the movie on set, with my editorial staff. And we were debating this constantly, and every time I would get into a new conversation, I would find out that, oh, this is even trickier than I thought. Is that what you meant by, because I read that one of your directions you gave Hugh Jackman was, don't load it, let the audience load it. Now, you might not remember. I don't remember.
It's a quote from Hugh.
That.
We got that from an interview. But I can only imagine that kind of direction to give to actors.
Oh well, look. Often, I think actors feel the need to do the work that the audience is going to do for them.
What do you mean?
Well, there is when you make a movie, it's like you are coming halfway and the audience is coming halfway and meeting you. The audience is going to bring their own baggage to the experience. Unless this is a very simple movie that's just going to make you feel one thing, make you feel happy or make you feel scared. If you're going to deal with complicated material, then you can't bring the movie all the way over the line. You have to bring it there and the audience has to come and meet you. And I think that's the only way to have an impact, to change them.
Is that hard? I mean, we're kind of talking filmmaking 101 here, but I don't really know anything about filmmaking.
I doubt that.
So a very little banjo player doesn't really happen, right? They don't give us a lot. How do you do that when the audience is only presumed? You know what I mean? Like it's not a play where you can stage it, get an audience's reaction.
Oh, where you actually can see them and know them how they're reacting.
Oh yeah, they reacted that way, and then the next day I'm going to make a change. So if a film is a trade-off between the audience's reaction to it and the actor's performance in it and the direction of it, how do you presume the audience in the film?
I mean, you can't, but you have to base it upon your personal response to the story the first time you hear it. You know, Kubrick used to talk about this, that one of the most important things as a director is to preserve the first response you have to the material, which is very hard. Because you can read the screenplay for the first time, have this visceral reaction, and of course, every time you read it and experience it in a new way, it dulls.
That's so.
Right?
That's something really lovely about that.
Yeah.
Trying to remember the way you feel about the source text the first time you.
I mean, it's like trying to remember the first time you eat something. It's trying the first time you meet your wife. I mean.
How long did it take you to make this film? Like.
This took a few years.
So then, with all respect, like, it must be hard to hold on to that original. I know I'm talking theory here.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate how thoughtful you're being about it. It changes. It really does evolve. My father has a great thing where he says, you have to stop and listen when the movie tells you who it is. Because at first, you're trying to manhandle it, and you're trying to tell the movie, this is who you are. And almost like a child, at a certain point, they evolve and grow up to a certain point, and then the movie turns back and tells you, no, this is who I am. And at that point, you have to listen.
Yeah, a friend of mine who's a songwriter says a similar thing. He says, let the song do the work for you. Just be there for it and let the song do the work. If you're just tuning in, I'm speaking to Jason Reitman about his latest film, The Front Runner, which tells the story of Gary Hart. His 1988 presidential run was finished after a very early sex scandal. Obviously, this is a very serious issue, but I share that this is also a very funny film. It is in some ways.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Just a little bit of background, just how inexperienced, because I think we take stakeouts for granted now. How inexperienced were these journalists at covering a sex scandal in the early days of covering sex scandals?
My understanding is that the guys who staked out Hart's townhouse did not know what they were doing.
Right.
They kind of admitted that themselves after the fact. And that's one of the things that's kind of so remarkable about the story. I mentioned this earlier, but it really is insane to think about the potential next president. I mean, this person who was really presumed to be the next president, winding up in his alleyway in the middle of the night with a group of reporters, and nobody knows what to do. He doesn't know what to do. The reporters don't know what to do. No one's ever been in this situation. And by the way, they wouldn't be in that situation ever again because we put these walls up of protection that prevent candidates and journalists from having natural discourse. It creates this idea that, somehow you're an assassin and I am a target. And that's unfortunate because we would have a better understanding of who these candidates were if there could be more natural conversation.
And we would have a better understanding who candidates even are now, if we would have a better of that.
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is because if I have headphones over there, if you wouldn't mind just putting them on for 1 second. It's not a This Is Your Life thing. It's we don't have any. I know you're terrifying. In Toronto, but we didn't get the VHS of your third birthday party.
Okay.
Your Predator birthday party. You want to hit that, Brittany?
There's a lot of work to do. We're all going to have to seriously question the system for selecting our national leaders that reduces the press of this nation to hunters and presidential candidates to being hunted. We all better do something to make this system work, or we're all going to be soon rephrasing Jefferson to say, "I tremble for my country," when I think we may, in fact, get the kind of leaders we deserve.
So that's Gary Hart, the man himself, the actual Gary Hart, giving a speech at a press conference a few days after the scandal had come to light back in 1987. How do you feel hearing that?
I mean, emotional for a variety of reasons. It is a very compelling idea and kind of heartbreaking idea that the most important speech he ever gave is the speech with which he left politics forever. I can't imagine any politician would ever want to be known for that. And there's three big ideas in that speech, right? One is about the relationship with the press. And one is this line that is now very interpreted as a signal of the coming of Donald Trump. This idea that we're going to get the leaders that we deserve. And sorry, the third just escaped me because they were going by so quickly as I listened, and then I was like, oh yeah, all three things. What were they? It was the, oh God.
That's all right, we can cut this out anyway.
I apologize. It all kind of struck me as they were coming by.
We'll change it so it says two.
All two things were.
let me ask you this then. Did making this film make you come away with a greater empathy for Gary Hart?
I want to answer this correctly. Making this film made me think more about who I want as a leader. At first you hear about Gary Hart and you hear about a guy who in 1987 said, we're addicted to oil. That addiction is going to take us into the Middle East. We're going to encounter Islamic terrorism. We will not know how to fight it because we have a military that only knows how to bomb people. That's very prescient. You have a guy who also was talking about education in a forward-thinking way. He was talking about computers and the internet and the way that they would change our economy. And you think, yeah, it would have been really nice to have this guy as a president. And then you bring in this moral dilemma that we continue to deal with to this day, which is, what kind of human beings do we want as our leaders? And everyone's going to have a different answer for that. And I think the process of this movie has made me think a lot personally about that question, because it has brought that conversation up with all the people that I'm close to who have thought a lot about this, because right now, it's, you can't help but get into a political conversation every 3 minutes. I don't know if it's changed my empathy level for Gary Hart. It's certainly changed my empathy level for Donna Rice or Monica Lewinsky or anyone who's gone through this process and really had their kind of life ripped from them.
How about the press? Did it make you think differently about what you need in terms of information about the people that you vote for?
What it made me think about the press is that their job is very difficult. And it is more difficult now than it ever has been because they're getting the crap beaten out of them on a daily basis from the White House. But I think they have a very tricky job. Look, the nature of journalism is changing in the same way that the nature of filmmaking is changing, in that we are getting our news from new sources and we are watching movies in new places. So there is this changing landscape. And in the same way that I imagine journalists wonder, okay, where am I really going to be read next? And where am I going to be seen next? I am thinking constantly about, where are people watching my movies? I literally was on a plane the other day, and people joke about this conceptually, but it happened. I was on a plane, and a few rows ahead of me, I hear something, I was like, I think that's Blade Runner. I can hear Blade Runner. And I peeked up, and there was a guy with his phone watching Blade Runner, no headphones, just watching Blade Runner, and no concept of the fact that I'm on a plane, I should put headphones on. But even beyond that, that was how he decided to watch the movie. Okay. So I think the landscape of journalism is changing. And if I was a journalist, I think I would be thinking about that all the time. As I think, it must be very tricky when you know what your readers want. You have an editorial staff who's telling you, look, you have to ask this question. Maybe you want to ask it, maybe you don't. And at the same time, you are interested in your subject who is being protected by a wall of PR people. I have a lot of empathy for that occupation, and I wish they had kind of more freedom to kind of ask the questions they want to ask and tell the stories they want to tell.
And it's coming out on Election Day, so it's a midterm election day in the U.S., so it's going to be part of the conversation.
I would love that.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for your thoughtful questions. That was wonderful.